really interesting document. It's a security and logistics assessment focused right on Europe's eastern flank, dated September 21, 2025. And this isn't some high-level strategy paper. This is about the immediate reality coming right after what the source calls the post-Zapad redeploy week.
Exactly. And for anyone following the region, Zapad and that whole redeployment phase, they're, key events. Yeah. So our job here is to cut through the, let's say, geopolitical chatter and get to the practical stuff. When this assessment says calm skies, what does that actually mean on the ground? What's the work involved? How are resources being, moved around? What does discipline look like day to day? Yeah, that summary phrase really jumps out. Calm skies, tighter playbooks. Oh. It suggests stability isn't just happening, it's built actively. So we're going to unpack that discipline. We'll start with the immediate security situation, then look at the money, the logistics, cross-border stuff, and finally dig into the thinking behind it all. Okay, let's jump into this first part then. The immediate security picture. The new normal, as the report puts it, right after that redeploy week. Our sources mention a specific week of probes and one pretty serious Baltic airspace scare. So how's the fence looking right now? What's the operational status? Well, the fence is holding, which is the main thing. What's striking really is the consistency. Overnight, no new Allied airspace breaches. That tells you the deterrent posture, that high readiness, it's actually working. And that very public shoot if inside posture, that hasn't changed. It's seen as, the hard line, non-negotiable. So the calm we're seeing, it's kind of manufactured by that readiness, but the real effort is in the layers underneath that. Okay, so what are those specific layers then? Especially if they have to keep this up 204/7, what's making the difference? It's all about defense in depth, layering. So you've got the layered CAPPs, combat air patrols running pretty much constantly. But the detail that really stood out to me was the focus on Dusk EW discipline. EW being electronic warfare, of course, using the spectrum to, mess with an adversary's communications or navigation. Right, EW. But why Dusk specifically? What makes that the riskiest time for EW discipline? Several things, really. First, you often have shift changes around then, human factor, potential for error, even if slight. But technically, and this is key, how radio waves travel, the propagation can change as the atmosphere cools at dusk. Sometimes that makes jamming or spoofing, a bit more effective or maybe harder to pin down quickly. So the discipline has to be super strict. Lights out protocols, minimizing your digital footprint, drills focused on GNSS, your GPS, and other satellite navigation systems, because those are always prime targets. Which brings us straight to the civilian side. Because everything from farming to trucking relies so heavily on GNSS. If these electronic threats are just routine, how are things like commerce actually working? The report mentions running degraded mode SOPs as routine. What does that actually look like? Well, that is probably the biggest sign of how mature the adaptation is. Trucking, aviation. They're basically built now to work, even if GPS gets jammed or spoofed. So for a pilot, a degraded mode SOP might mean relying more on older tech, like inertial navigation or ground beacons, flying different routes, carrying more fuel just in case. Less efficient, but safer. And for a big trucking company, it could mean manual checks, maybe using non-GPS ways to figure out location, even just paper maps and radio, basically treating a jam signal like it's Tuesday afternoon, not a 5-alarm fire. Okay, so adapting to the threat is the new normal. Yeah. Got it. Now, after that redeploy week, what lessons are translating into actual spending? What are the capitals prioritizing right now? They're reacting fast to the gaps shown up by those probes. That week of probes, it seems, really hammered home that while the high-altitude defenses are solid, the low-altitude stuff, that's trickier. So units coming back from deployment are triggering this big push for counter-UAS, dealing with small, cheap drones, and SHORAD, short-range air defense. The money's going towards systems that protect specific spot spaces, key buildings against those close-in, harder-to-spot threats. Right. One last thing in this section. There's always that background noise, isn't there? That low-level chatter about NATO escalation. How are towns and cities keeping people calm when the military tempo is so high? It really comes down to what the report calls tight comms hygiene. They've learned, probably the hard way, that just constantly pushing out little updates, that tends to create more anxiety, not less. So instead, they're sticking to one-message alerts with confidence labels, meaning if an alert goes out, it's verified. It's necessary, and it clearly says how serious it is and who it's from. The idea is to make every alert count, make it trusted, not just add to the noise and the rumors, and that trust management. It's arguably just as vital as the EW discipline.
Okay, let's follow that thread then, the resources. Switching gears a bit to the economic and logistical side, because this kind of sustained, disciplined security posture, well, it costs money and it creates friction for trade.
Yeah, and if you connect that cost to the bigger economic picture, what's interesting, maybe even a bit counterintuitive, is how mature the market reaction has been. Currencies like the Polish zloty, the Hungarian forint, the Romanian leu, PLN, HUF, the report describes them as broadly range-bound.
So why aren't the markets freaking out more with all this military activity nearby?
Because it seems the market has already priced it in. This high readiness state isn't a sudden shock. It's become the background condition, the ongoing reality. So traders, they're looking more closely at the next EU economic data releases, inflation figures, growth forecasts, budget news. That's what's moving the needle day to day, more than the known security posture. Essentially, the market's view is geopolitical risk is sort of stable, albeit high, while the macro factors are more dynamic right now.
That stability is interesting, especially when you look at the actual money being spent. Let's talk about this safe spend security allocation for the eastern flank, the priority list. This is the roadmap for the budget, right?
Exactly. This list is gold. It shows you precisely what the commanders on the ground are asking for. And the money is heavily weighted towards sensors, jammers, so EW kit SHORAD again, advanced training for the operators and EW specialists, and crucially, spares. It's not really about buying flashy new jets or tanks. It's about keeping the current systems running, hardening them, and making sure that people know how to use them under pressure. Sustainment.
And the report makes a point about how they're buying a strong preference for framework deals over one-offs. Why does that structure matter so much? Why frameworks?
It points directly to needing long-term predictability. And interoperability, of course. A framework deal locks in suppliers, often across multiple allied nations, for years. That means standardized parts, common training, shared maintenance procedures. If you just do a one-off panic buy of some new tech, you might spend the next 5 years just figuring out how to plug it into everything else. Frameworks mean that in 5 years, the equipment is standard, people are trained on it, it works together. Predictability and reliability are valued more than just getting something new quickly in this kind of sustained effort.
Okay, let's get down to the nitty-gritty. Cross-border logistics, the lifeblood of the regional economy. Are those extra costs we saw during the really tense weeks starting to ease off?
They are easing, but maybe modestly is the right word. It suggests things are going back to a kind of high-friction normal, not quite a crisis, but definitely not business as usual either. For example, the diesel premia, the extra cost for fuel on those border routes they're coming down. Relaxing. But, and this is a key detail, modest insurance surcharges linger through month end. So while the big markets seem calm, the individual trucking company, they're still paying a bit more because the risk underwriters haven't fully eased off yet. That micro-level friction is still there.
So what's the practical situation for travelers or freight moving through those sensitive border zones right now?
Right, so for Belarus crossings, things are gradually getting back towards a regular flow. But discipline is still the word. Travelers definitely need to plan for extra time, the report suggests, plus 20, 45 minutes. And that's not usually traffic jams. It's more about increased manual checks, document reviews, rail and intermodal freight. That's apparently running close to its normal schedule again. Ukraine corridors remain stable, with a heavy focus on keeping humanitarian aid flowing smoothly. Commercial traffic should expect some periodic targeted inspections, though. And importantly, regional airports are operating normally, ops normal, but, and this is crucial, their NOTAM playbooks are ready to go.
Okay, what does that mean exactly? Having a NOTAM playbook ready for a potential mass strike night, what does that involve for a civilian airport?
It means they have pre-agreed emergency procedures that can be activated instantly. NOTAM's notices to air missions, they'd go out immediately. That could trigger diversions for incoming flights, immediate ground stops for departures, closing certain runways, maybe grounding all non-essential civilian planes in the area. They're not expecting a strike, but they've drilled the reactions so much that if a threat does appear, there's zero hesitation or confusion. It's about being able to effectively turn off the lights and secure everything within minutes, that level of readiness.
That need for disciplined, immediate reaction flows perfectly into our last section here, the thinking behind all this. The report introduces something called the SCALE Quick Insight Map. This sounds like the instruction manual for those tighter playbooks.
Exactly right. SCALE is like the framework that explains why all this discipline from the EW operator to the border guard to the airport manager is structured this way. It kicks off with S for stakeholders, recognizing that you're balancing a whole bunch of competing needs.
Right. Like you've got residents who need clear, minimal alerts. They don't want constant panic alarms.
Yeah.
But then you have logistics firms needing predictable ETAs for their trucks. That's crucial for business. And mayors are trying to manage rumor control while small businesses are watching fuel prices and insurance costs like hawks. It's a real balancing act of information needs.
And that balancing act leads straight to C, which the report calls the constraint flip, clarity volume. This is a really important shift in how they think about communication. The big lesson seems to be that in this kind of environment, just flooding everyone with information, even if it's accurate, can be counterproductive. It creates fatigue, maybe even panic. So fewer, crisper messages beat drip feed nudges. Make every official communication count. Make it clear, trusted, actionable. Otherwise, you undermine the very confidence you need when a real crisis hits.
I like how they make this abstract idea of constant vigilance feel more concrete with the analogy.
Yeah, the analogy they use is really effective. Treat the flank like winter ops, slow, layered, discipline. Think about driving on ice, right? You slow down. You leave extra space. You check your systems. You build in redundancy. You accept it's going to take longer. Efficiency takes a backseat to reliability and safety. That winter ox mindset, it really grounds this whole challenge in a patient, methodical, resilient approach. It's not about speed. It's about endurance.
Makes sense. Then we get to L for layers. This seems to cover everything from the tiny technical stuff right up to grand strategy.
That's exactly it. It shows how the discipline operates at all scales. At the micro level, you've got layers, like very specific GNSS advisories, maybe for farmers using drones or construction projects needing precision. Super technical, very targeted. But at the macro level, the entire effort, the exercises, the spending, the constant readiness, the patience, it's all layered into reinforcing alliance credibility. Just showing up day after day, year after year with working kit and trained people, that steady presence is the layer of deterrence.
And finally, E for edge cases. The really tricky, low probability but high impact scenarios they have to plan for. What specific risks are they focused on right now?
The report flags two particularly nasty ones. First, dealing with spoofing during medevac situations. Imagine jamming or misleading the navigation of an emergency medical helicopter. The response has to be immediate, relying on non-electronic backups, absolute procedural discipline, high stakes. Second is managing debris, false alarms in low-density areas. You know, a bit of falling space junk or some other unexplained flash or bang in a remote area that could trigger local panic or waste valuable resources, sending teams out to investigate nothing. So you need really disciplined procedures to verify quickly and communicate calmly to avoid wasting trust and resources on false alarms. These edge cases really test the system.
It really is a deep dive into the sheer discipline needed to keep those skies quiet. The main takeaway seems crystal clear, summed up in that sign-off. Steady is the point. Keep layers up, buffers honest, comms tidy.
Steady is the point. That sums up the whole philosophy, doesn't it? And before we finish, we should give you 3 specific things to keep an eye on over the next, say, 48 to 72 hours. These come straight from the source's outlook.
Okay, give us a short list. What should listeners be tracking?
All right. First, watch the final redeploy nights this week. Look for any reports of border-skirting UAVs, drones flying right along the edge, or any brief short EW spikes. Moving heavy gear back home is often when adversaries might try a little probing, opportunistic stuff. Second, keep an eye on the SAFE sequencing. What are the first actual purchase contracts announced under that funding? Are they rushing to buy more SHORAD and sensors for low-altitude threats? Or are they prioritizing restocking expensive missiles first? That tells you where the immediate worry is. And third, track the macro glide. Watch those upcoming EU economic data points and see how the Polish, Hungarian, and Romanian currencies react. If they start getting volatile, it might suggest the market's manufactured calm is starting to fray a bit.
It really drives home the point. Quiet skies aren't luck. They're maintenance. Constant discipline maintenance. And that brings us to our final thought for you to mull over. The guiding principle is clarity volume, fewer, better messages. So the question is, given that constraint, how much of the necessary visible maintenance and preparation can actually be done without accidentally sparking the very rumors or anxieties it's trying to prevent? That tension, between showing your ready deterrence and keeping things calm through quiet competence, that seems like the core strategic tightrope they're walking on the eastern flank right now. Something to think about.